across the globe. It's dedicatedly worked towards encouraging social welfare and humanitarian causes. The soulful essence of this multicultural organization inspires us for boutique initiatives and activities that showcase the priceless literary and cultural assets of India. The foundation dedicatedly works towards widening the reach and leadership of English literature, Hindi literature and regional literature under the auspices of its multifaceted initiatives like Kitab, An Author's Afternoon, The Right Circle, Kalam, etc. Every initiative of the foundation presented by patron Sri Cement Limited is bolstered by the support and cooperation of distinguished associates, partners, collaborators and Ehsaas Women of India. The collaborative ventures facilitate the foundation's implementation of its various initiatives across the globe. To widen the cultural spectrum, the Barkha Foundation exchanges cross-city mementos, treats chief guests and our eminent audience with the authentic local cuisines, and appreciates the handloom and the sculpture work of local artisans when it's time to give appreciation to the esteemed personalities. The anthem of the foundation deserves a special mention. It portrays the beautiful philosophy of the nation, unity in diversity. Today, I am delighted to welcome Barkha Dutt in conversation with Ruhi Walia to the Right Circle session in Jalandhar. Barkha Dutt is one of the brightest minds of India. She is a well-acclaimed broadcast journalist, famous for frontline news reporting from the toughest zones in the world, including war-ravaged places and insurgencies. She became a household name with her daredevil media coverage of the Kargil war from the war grounds. Her vast expanse of work from inclement areas is proof of her fearlessness. She's a person whose passion for news coverage is always won over fears, be it the Kargil war, the tsunami or the 26/11 terrorist attacks. She's done a stellar job in fearless news reporting. Barkha Dutt is a featured opinion columnist with the Washington Post and Hindustan Times. She has received numerous national and international awards, including the Padma Shri. She is also the founder-editor of the YouTube news channel Mojo Story, an independent multimedia digital platform that covers media stories courageously, compassionately and creatively. Her channel has been recognized twice as the best digital channel in India in 2021 and 2022. Most recently, she spent 2 years traveling through India reporting on the pandemic, covering 30,000 kilometers by road. She chronicled the COVID-19 migration crisis, the biggest exodus of migrant workers all over India and one of the biggest humanitarian crises ever in India, in her book, To Hell and Back, Humans of COVID. Her vivid recording of the human story of the pandemic spans the two dreaded waves of COVID and its latest avatar, the Omicron. Conversationalist Ms. Ruhi Walia is also an Ehsaas Woman of Jalandhar and a great literary enthusiast. I would like to now call upon the Director of Radisson Hotel Jalandhar, Ms. Divya Kapoor Shildana, to say a few words.
A very good evening to everyone present here. It gives me immense gratitude and happiness to be part of the Barkha Foundation this evening. As the Director of Radisson Hotel Jalandhar, I would like to sincerely thank the Barkha Foundation for engaging my mother, Mrs. Sabina Kapoor, as a member and collaborating with our Hotel Radisson for yet another event. Last but not the least, a big thank you to Mrs. Barkha Dutt for joining us on this platform. I now hand over the mic to Ruhi. Thank you.
I'm here today for none other than Barkha Dutt to discuss her new book, Humans of COVID, To Hell and Back. This is a book about the pandemic, about death, and about resilience in the face of it. It's so detailed that it's overwhelming to read. It kept me up all night. Barkha, you've chronicled so many different stories in it. What struck me most in the book was, it's about the truth. The truth that we all lived for 2 years. And truth sometimes is, infinitely more powerful, more stranger than even fiction can be. So Barkha, of course, writing this book must have not been a very joyous process for you. But sometimes writing these kind of books is very cathartic. Was it that for you?
Yeah, thank you Ruhi, thank you Divya, good evening everyone. And just before I answer your question, I know that all of you here must be thinking and are too polite to just tell me कि यार COVID की बात है, right? I'm sure there's a part of you that feels that we've just emerged from the shadows of something so terrible. So why are we talking about it? And the way to understand it is in a couple of different ways. One, this book is not about it's not a medical story. I know there are lots of doctors in the hall. They're more qualified to talk about the science and the medicine. For me, this is a book about India. It's a book about our country. It's a book about all of us. It's a book about all those horrible things you mentioned. Death, struggle, a sense of loneliness. But it's also a book about hope. If you read it, you will find extraordinary stories of courage, whether within the medical community or in civil society, how people stood with people, how when there was a vacuum and you didn't know who to turn to, perfect strangers in online spaces were actually, providing you help, how gurdwaras opened their doors for oxygen langars, where oxygen tanks replaced the Kara Prasad. There are those kind of stories here. And there's one other thing, and in Punjab I can tell this story. There's a sociologist called Ashish Nandi, and Ashish Nandi did this work on memory and partition. And he said he found, and I'm comparing this to partition because when those workers were walking home, it was the largest mass movement of human beings in India since the partition of India. But Ashish Nandi, and I urge you all to Google this, just Google memory and partition. You're from Punjab, the story is close to you culturally. He said, he found that partition की जो families थी ना, they didn't want to remember. या तो वो बहुत याद करते थे या वो बिल्कुल उसको जैसे ट्रंक में बंद करके रख दो. नहीं याद करना, it's too unpleasant. And I think we've all had some of those conversations with our grandparents, with our parents, who were like, yeah, it was life-defining, but you know what, I don't want to talk about it. And Ashish Nandi did this study where he showed that the more you try and suppress the memory of something very large that happens to you, the less likely are you to heal from it. So I find something very similar about the last 2 years. I feel that it was so overwhelming for so many people. It was probably the single most life-changing event that affected the globe, that we will witness in our lifetime, that we want to forget it. And it's good to forget it, even I want to move on. But can you move on without confronting your memory? Can you move on without confronting the fact that our sense of ourselves, our sense of what matters to us, our priorities, the nature of work, the nature of office, what is work from home, what is work-life balance, do you invest, do you socialize more, do you socialize less? How have industries had to change from the hospitality industry to factories, to tech, everything in our lives has changed. So what I'm trying to say here is that much like when we went into a kind of mode of denial and forgetting in our parents' and grandparents' generation when partition happened, I know that there is an instinct to not want to remember terrible things, difficult things. But maybe it's like, wo jab chot lagti hai na, doctors will always tell you, when they're doctors in the audience, ki usko aap treat kare bina patti nahi laga sakte. Usko treat to karna padega. Sometimes it will need air, sometimes it will need amputation, sometimes it will need Dettol. You can't just tie it up and think you'll get okay. So I wrote this book with the full knowledge that maybe people won't read it in one go, maybe people won't read it today, maybe people will need another year before they can read all of it, maybe people want to read it as part of their past and not part of their present. But when they read it, they will find a reflection of themselves or somebody they know. And this I will say to you कि आप ये पढ़ेंगे तो आपको इस किताब में अपनी झलक जो आप पे बीती या आपकी जानने वालों या चाहने वालों पे बीती, आपको वो झलक नजर आएगी. And lastly, as tough as it was, I wrote this book because I had the honor to record, to witness history. While the whole country was in lockdown, I was out. I traveled 14 states of India. I traveled from the north to the south, from Delhi to Kerala, back in the middle to Ladakh because it looked like war was going to break out between India and China, and then back on the road again to cover COVID. And I feel like for me to have witnessed all that and not recorded, that is a disservice to history.
Great segue to ask you the next question is, Kargil War in 1999 was India's first televised war. And of course we have retired Brigadier Bajwa with us here in the audience. Please everyone say hi. So before I move to the question, you were in the front line in Kargil. You were giving us the story. He was there protecting you, protecting us. So is there anything that you want to say to him today here?
Yes, I'm so delighted to see Brigadier Bajwa here. I got out of the lift and I'm so used to seeing him in a uniform that to see him, I didn't recognize him like this. Because you're so used to seeing a soldier only in a uniform. But how many of you are familiar with Brigadier Bajwa? Brigadier, there are two stories about Brigadier Bajwa. Some of you are young in this hall. How many of you were, let's say, above 10 in 1999?
Yeah, my daughter is here.
Where is she? Please raise your hands. Okay, the reason I'm asking this, because you've all heard shades of Kargil. And I quickly, before I come to me and Kargil and how it changed me, I just want to take 2 minutes with your permission to speak about Brigadier Bajwa. There used to be a peak, a conical peak called Tiger Hill. Right? Tiger Hill was this peak that used to overlook the national highway that connected Leh to Srinagar. It was a very critical highway because it was the highway on which the military convoys moved, all your supplies, everything moved on that highway. And because Tiger Hill had the height looking down on this highway, when the Pakistanis were on top of Tiger Hill, what was Kargil? The Pakistanis came in 8 kilometers inside Indian territory and captured our land. The military pushed them out. It was Op Vijay. We are in that summer every year when we commemorate Op Vijay. Tiger Hill was critical to reclaim because you needed to get the Pakistanis out from this vantage point that they had of the highway. Because if they could control the heights, you could not win the war, right? Brigadier Bajwa is the hero of Tiger Hill. He led the operations to take that impossible jagged mountain peak back from the Pakistanis. But that story doesn't end there. इनकी एक और उससे भी ज़्यादा अगर आप सोच सकते हैं कि इससे बड़ा कमाल क्या हो सकता है? I always say to जो टेलीविजन पे हर शाम चलाते हैं ना पेट्रियोटिज्म के बारे में, उनको कुछ नहीं मालूम what a soldier's code actually is, what a code of war is. Brigadier Bajwa, after he took back Tiger Hill, found that there was one Pakistani fellow who had put up a tough fight. He's curious, ये है कौन है ये बंदा? And when he started examining it, he found in the body of that slain Pakistani, that he was carrying a letter from his wife. A letter to his wife, for what was it, sir? Letter to ki from?
Yes, from his wife and from his wallet.
From his wife. And he just left a little note about how this man was a worthy adversary. उसने भी दम लगा के लड़ाई की. अब आप सोचिए कि आगे क्या हुआ. This man was awarded Pakistan's highest military honor because Brigadier Bajwa, even in the battlefield, was generous enough to take that height back from the Pakistanis and then commend the courage of his adversary, because that is the spirit of a soldier. And I really think it is one of the most extraordinary war stories. So actually Brigadier Bajwa should be the guest today, not me. But
No, please.
Zarur is when you get a chance to mingle, ask him more about this. But you asked about Kargil and I'll just take 2 sentences. Kargil was 99, COVID was 2020. I always say that so far my journey, my life's journey, my journey as a journalist, अगर मुझे 2 bookend करने हो ना, it's the from Kargil. और दोनों ही cases में रूही, the impulse inside me was the same. कि मुझे रात को नींद नहीं आती थी if I couldn't be where the action was. In both cases, it was highly dangerous. In both cases, it was a great unknown. I was not even 27 years old when I went to the war front. I was a 20-something. The soldiers I was reporting on were 23, 24, a couple of years younger than me. It is the great honor of my life to have reported Kargil. It is the great honor of my life that what you now know from a movie called Sher Shah was actually real life for me. That I met young soldiers who I was very interested in this concept of fear and vulnerability. So I heard soldiers and they used to find me very odd. Nobody had ever asked them that. And we have this idea of the soldier as someone who doesn't feel scared. Everybody feels scared. But a soldier is trained to deal with fear. Right? So I was trying to understand this. And Vikram had just come from pushing the Pakistanis back from one mountain peak, and he was due to go for his next mission. And I asked him, "Aapko dar nahi lagta?" And he threw his head back and he laughed and he said, "Ye dil mange wo." Right? And Ye dil mange wo used to be the Pepsi Cola ka jingle. Okay? And now today, poor Bichara Pepsi, nobody knows it as that. Everybody knows it almost like a national slogan. Now think of the privilege and the honor I felt that my actual interview, and you see the clip at the end of the movie, that's my interview. And you say first televised war. I don't know how many of you know, there was no mobile phones in Jammu and Kashmir because they were blocked because of security reasons. There were no broadcast vans. Indian TV news hadn't evolved to the point private television news was 4 years old. Private TV news started in India in 1995. In 1999, we didn't have the concept of live broadcasting from the field. And my biggest challenge used to be, how do I send this? We used to still shoot on tapes then. How do I send these tapes back? So we used to, हमने 4 journalists का group बनाया हुआ था, 3 boys and me. We used to walk on the highway to the points in the highway where the choppers were taking off, taking the coffins and body bags of our soldiers back home. And we used to fold our hands and ask the army pilots, "Sir, can you take our tape back? Sir, can you take our tape back?" So what I'm trying to say is, when your challenge becomes survival, logistics, when you feel that you're part of something larger than yourself, your fear goes on the back burner. वो fear जाता नहीं है, वो कहीं और थोड़ी देर के लिए halt हो जाता है, and then it comes later. Why do you think soldiers have post-traumatic stress disorder? Why do you think conflict reporters deal with PTSD? Please appreciate that when the war is over, when COVID is over, I'm sure a lot of health workers have worked with this. I'm sure doctors and nurses have seen, or people whose job it was to run cremations in graveyards. I am sure they have seen images that are going to haunt them forever. And let me share with you that when the crisis is over, is when you think the trauma is over. For the person at the front line, for the front line responder, they only have the luxury of the trauma starting when the conflict ends. No health worker had a moment to pause and process कि हो क्या रहा है till it was over. No soldier had the time to see हो क्या रहा है till it was over. And no journalist that would take you out to the field had the time to think हो क्या रहा है till it was over. So it's the same personality that pushes me to go and cover Kargil, and the same personality that pushes me to go and travel across India during the pandemic.
Yes, of course, you've been in the front line and you are there, you've been in the front line, but how do you block out those images once the story is filed? What is your coping mechanism, Barkha?
The only coping mechanism I have is when I don't want to think, I start watching murder mysteries and spy thrillers, and उसमें और भी violence हो रहा होता है, उसमें और भी like some dishu like typical, like right now I'm binge watching something called Blind Spot on Amazon Prime. I really have many of you seen it. Yeah, so I just keep like whenever I'm tense, I'm like, okay, I can't cope anymore. Let me just watch some Blind Spot. Like it is so unreal, but like you just can lose yourself. But it sounds very silly, but you have to look for. I remember when I was traveling during the pandemic, I used to buy Cadbury's Nutties. And people were like, why do you do it? I said, I don't know, I need something that will give me comfort, that feels a little familiar, that feels like home. So my driver let me, because we drove, everything was shut, public transport was shut. That's why we were driving, by the way, in case you all have forgotten. First wave, second wave, I was fine. And you cope with little things like that. You cope by reading a book, you cope by watching a movie, you cope by crying to a friend.
Yours was nutties.
Mine was nutties and murder mysteries. I'm pretty nutties and murder mysteries.
So, Barkha, what ignited that extraordinary action on your part? An action that is so different from our armchair journalism, the kind of study so far stuff that we see or do, which is really effective, but nothing like getting in there and really understanding the pulse of the enormity of what was unfolding. Please tell us about the catalyst, that what began for you.
So I think for me, my role model was my mother. My mother was actually born in Gurdaspur. She's from Punjab. She did her journalism at Punjab University. And when she was 19 years old, she went to the Hindustan Times. Tab TV to tha nahi, digital bhi nahi tha, there was only newspapers. And her name was Prabha Dutt. She went to the Hindustan Times and she asked for a job. And the Hindustan Times told her that we don't have any place for women. So she fought with them. And they said, well, if you want to be a woman in the newsroom, we'll let you cover the flower show. Or to kuch pool ki shows, flower show, that was better. Anyway, long story cut short, she was very tough, I think even tougher than me. She became the head of the bureau, she was a hard-nosed investigative reporter. And then in 1965, war broke out between India and Pakistan. And like mother, like daughter, she went to her editor and said, I want to go and cover this war. Now this editor, who did not think women should be there at all, said, there's no question of this. So, bada ladai jhagda hua, and she said, okay, if you're not going to let me cover this war, तो आप मुझे छुट्टी दे दीजिए. Because if you're not going to let me cover the only story that matters, I don't want to be in the newsroom. I'm feeling very frustrated. He said, okay, you take a few days off. She then took she had a cousin in the army. She took a notepad and note pen, and she went to Punjab border by herself. And she was India's first woman war correspondent. So I grew up, she died when I was very young, when I was 13 years old, but by then, I had been shaped by these stories. I had grown up hearing these stories. That was the point of reference for me. The second thing is, Rohi, I really feel, for me in that way, Kargil was not just a journalistic assignment, it was a masterclass in life. It was an early exposure to ideas of courage, valor, what is ethical, what is not, what is vulnerability, that all of this can coexist. But it also taught me that I wanted to be the kind of journalist who would go to places that other people were not willing to go. I wanted to be the bridge between my reader or viewer and a place they couldn't access. And Kargil became the beginning of my reporting. Thereafter I covered the insurgency in the Kashmir Valley for years. I went to Afghanistan, I went to Pakistan, I went to Iraq when Saddam Hussein was beheaded, I went to Libya and Egypt, this is what I started doing. So when COVID happened, I said, you know what, if I stay inside, I am not doing justice to my duty as a journalist. It's an under ki awaaz, I can't explain it. It's either there or it's not.
You had the strength, but what about your team? How did they gather the strength?
This is a very important question and there's no easy answer to it. Because I had just left TV a few months ago and become an entrepreneur and decided कि अब बहुत हो गया. I want a boss, I want to be my own boss, I want to start my own company, and COVID happened. And so I had a very young team, a very small team. We had just started and I was like, okay, now I'm responsible for them. So एक बात होती है, you are a daredevil yourself. Now you're responsible for other people. What do you do? And all I could do, to be honest, is take as many precautions as was possible. So, when we started, we didn't even know COVID was there gone. तब वो एक impression था कि वो surface से transfer होता है, fomites, which was wrong. But we were made to, doctors told us, आप gloves लेके जाइए, आप Dettol लेके जाइए, आप हाथ धोते रहिए, आप. Then we moved into the PPE stage. And I'll tell you a very strange thing. I really feel like, till I went into the war zone, I really didn't understand what soldiers go through. Till I went into the field, I really didn't understand what health workers go through. And I'll give you a small example. I, obviously with consent, would is, other than the migration crisis, I was also inside ICUs, inside slum tenements, Dharavi. I went into a special ward for children. We did something on what was happening to children with autism and COVID. I mean, there were so many things to tell. But we'd have to go in a full PPE, head to toe. And every time I would wear a PPE, something very strange would happen to me. I would be claustrophobic. So I literally just couldn't physically breathe. And it was really a fight between my mind and my body. And my mind would say, okay, just tolerate it for a little bit. And every time that shoot would end, I would run out. I would literally strip usko kisi tarah nikalo. And just then मैं PPE पहनती थी, I would go back to my जहाँ भी हम रह रहे थे. It wasn't always a hotel room. Hotels were closed. कभी किसी के घर, कभी किसी के friend, कभी किसी farm house पे. We spent nights in the car. I would cry. Just then मुझे PPE. I don't know what it was. So one day I decided I'm going to start talking to nurses. What happens? What happens to them? And you would be astonished, and it's in the book, what kind of details people started sharing. One nurse told me, when I go home, my child doesn't want to come near me because he says that your body smells of plastic because whole day I'm in PPE. One other person said that the oxygen, I feel that there's a diminished oxygen to my head, so I feel faint. Somebody else spoke about not being able to go to the bathroom because anyway for women in particular, they were not very friendly, they were not designed for women, they were again designed for men. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes as a reporter, to really feel what you're reporting on, you have to be there. You have to experience what your subject is experiencing. Whether it is the worker who is walking 1,000 kilometers, whether it is that doctor who, I'll tell you, in Kargil, because I had to again fight a little bit because army in the beginning was not keen to have women at the front. So उनका कहना था कि very all men zone कि भाई कमरे नहीं है, खाना नहीं है, bathroom नहीं, क्या करोगे? I said I'm not tension. So I'll be conscious of being a girl at the front line. So there was this amazing experience we had. There was a bunch of young soldiers who saved our lives, literally saved our lives. तो हमें कुछ पता तो था नहीं. We'd never been in a war zone. और हम वो highway पे खड़े थे, and bombs were raining from the Pakistani side. And I was standing next to an ammunition dump, and I didn't understand. I didn't notice I was standing next to an ammunition dump. So one soldier, and there were clouds of smoke everywhere. We were running. I was standing, hiding there. So one soldier came and said, "Man, you're standing next to an ammunition dump. If a bomb falls on this, you will die." So I said, "Where do I go?" I've lost my cameraman. He said, "Go into this bunker." So he pushed me into this underground bunker. I said, "I can't go. I've lost my cameraman. How can I leave him out there and go into the safety?" He said, "I'll go and find him." So he found him and my two other colleagues who we were traveling with. Four of us spent that night in a bunker. We grew very grateful to these soldiers who had saved our lives. Next morning, these soldiers got their orders कि अब आपकी बारी है, अब आप ऊपर जाइए, आपका mission है. We thought young people were in their 20s. These young soldiers were also in their 20s and they were telling us stories, broken engagements, old parents at home, the human side of soldiers. And the three boys in that group started crying. And I was, because they felt, yeah, these men saved their lives, yeah, will we ever see them again? But I wasn't going to cry because I felt कि ये तो मैं बड़ी मुश्किल से लड़ झगड़ के आई हूँ, जैसे ये तो बिल्कुल लड़की जैसे रो रही है, I was young. अब 2 decades later, I have cried openly and easily while covering COVID. I have cried with the people I have reported. If they've cried, I've cried. And I'll tell you, sorry, I don't want to keep it out of time, so I'll do this quickly. I'll tell you, there was a doctor and he lived in Chennai. And he had to go and bury his best friend in a cemetery behind a church. And I was also a doctor. He died from COVID because he didn't stop meeting his patients. And this doctor, when he went to basically in the ambulance in the hearse, took his body. There was a lot of ignorance at that time. What is COVID? Look how done it. So all the locals came out, running, screaming, shouting, and threw stones at the ambulance of this body and broke the ambulance. They had to go away from there. Then they went to another church cemetery, the same thing happened. They couldn't cremate him. They had to cremate him in some third place. This doctor, while recounting this story to me, was sobbing. He was weeping. He said, is it a doctor's fate either to be treated? We are either treated as gods or we are treated as animals. Are we not human beings? Do we not? Are we never going to be treated as just normal? And he started crying. And I'll tell you, I was interviewing him and I started crying. And that was in a way, the growing up, I had to go through that rites of passage, prove myself in Kargil, prove myself. Now having proved myself, if someone is in pain, I don't hesitate to show emotion. I think that is my point. I don't hesitate. I don't see it as a sign of weakness. I see it as a sign of empathy. And I think there's no contradiction between sometimes having a good cry and still being brave. There's nothing, one doesn't cancel out the other, But in my 20s, I used to think, that people think you're very weak.
Well said. What was also very striking in the book was, you named each and every person you were talking to. And normally we don't do that, they're nameless people. How did you do that? How did you keep a track of that? Did you sometimes lose track? And, what did you do about it?
So I did the same thing in Kargil. If you were to Google even some of the work I did from Kargil, I was very keen that whoever I was managing to speak to, उनके नाम हो, कि विक्रम बत्रा का नाम हो, एक दूसरे के कैप्टन विशाल उनका नाम. I didn't know. Today I know so many of them. I was meeting most of them for the first time, and again I tell you, I never covered the military before. This was my first job. I had just returned from Columbia University in 1997. In 1998, and the war broke out. So, it was very important to me to humanize the soldier. Similarly, in COVID, I felt that everybody had become a data point. We had become used to dashboards. COVID cases, itne. COVID deaths, itne. COVID hospitalization, itne. It didn't tell you who these people were. Who were they? We say migrant worker. What is migrant? Who? We say nurses. Who? So I write about a nurse who, when Ajmal Kasab was part of 10 Pakistani terrorists who takes the city of Bombay, he goes with his AK-47 into a hospital. And the nurse on duty in that hospital is on duty in the neonatal ward, which means she's looking after new mothers and their newborn babies. And now that nurse is on COVID duty. And this is a young woman who has seen so much in her young life. What is the impact on her psychologically? Her name is Yogita. I write about a man who sells his phone for 2,000 rupees to buy his family a pankha and some chawal, and then takes his life using his wife's dupatta. His name was Mukesh. I write about Leelavati, a 70-year-old old lady whose son threw her out because he said, "मेरे पास पैसे नहीं, अब जाओ, मेरी कमाई नहीं होनी, अब जाओ." And I meet her sitting alone outside the railway station in Bombay, waiting for a train to nowhere because she has nowhere to go. And I said, "Where are you going?" And she says, "पता नहीं, आप मुझे दिल्ली ले जाओ." So I said, "मैं दिल्ली पहुंचवा भी दूँ," because trains have now started running for migrant workers. तो आप जाएंगी कहाँ? She said, "पता नहीं, मेरे बच्चे तो मुझे नहीं दे रहे. My husband is dead. तो मैं दिल्ली जाके right? So how do you? My aim was that as a journalist, you must get to know these people. You must feel कि आप इनको जानते हैं. Because if I just use these nomenclatures that you see in the media, doctors, health workers, migrant workers, right? You will not know who they are. You will not know their story. You will not feel for them. So I have named every single person that I have written about. Every single person. Some names I lost. Some people I had to retrace. Some people, पता नहीं कहाँ से पर्चियाँ निकाल के try to, and the ones I couldn't find the name of, I had to leave out of the book. There were many more people I met, but if I couldn't name them, if I couldn't give them a name, and that's why yes to Helen Back were also humans of COVID, because these were the human beings. They all had an individual story.
Yeah, but Barkha, was it that you always got consent, or is it that sometimes they felt that you were being very intrusive?
I've always got consent. And I feel very strongly about this because, I don't think that when someone is suffering, you can go and throw a mic in their face. But if you ask people, it's a very, I would say 95% of the people I met wanted to talk. If they didn't want to talk, they wanted कि भाई आप अपने तरीके से हमारे साथ जो बीत रही है आप प्लीज बताइए उसको. And I found that mostly what people were feeling, because people were feeling very alone, and many people had lost people they loved, they wanted to not be invisible. They wanted, even in cremation grounds and graveyards, people wanted to talk because they didn't want to be invisible. They didn't want to be just a number. But consent is very important. And I took, like I would always say, Apat Karna Chahiye. There were about 5% people who said, and I would walk. There were some people who said, आप शक्ल मत दिखाइएगा लेकिन हमारी आवाज़ दे दीजिए. Or for example, in the ICU, we had a rule because the patients were too ill to give consent. We didn't show any face. So we would shoot in the ICU only with the doctors when we had the consent in designated areas where it was safe to talk. And when we would show the patient, we would only show pair, pipe, heart. Nobody was identified. So always consent. Always with consent.
You know, you pointed that really early in your book, and I'd like to quote you. The virus was anything but the great equalizer. In an already stratified society, it created a new social order. Please tell us about that.
In the beginning, we were told कि ये तो बहुत ही, you know, ये हम, this is the one thing we are all experiencing, so we're all equal. Yes, we all suffered, but we didn't suffer like the person who is a daily wage worker who earns 300 rupees a day, who suddenly has no income, suddenly has no food to feed his children, and doesn't have a roof over his head because his landlord has said that तो काम नहीं है, because most of them were living on makeshift factory बन रही है या building बन रहा है, they were living on site. Now there's no work. What are we going to do with you? Some people were kind. Some of the employers were kind. Many said it's not economically feasible. And the point that I try to make in this is, you know, I tell the book opens with a chapter called The Village with the Yellow Water. And in the beginning, we were all told कि आप हाथ धोते रहिए. Keep washing your hands. So I discovered there was a village about, it's actually on the Delhi-Sonipat road. If you drive from Delhi to Sonipat, वो रास्ते में आता है. And there are lots of factories उसके आसपास, और उस गांव में underground water contaminated हो गया था. So because the underground water contaminated हो गया था, वो जो पानी नलकों में आता था from the public distribution system, it was chemically contaminated. So it was yellow. So it was not fit to drink. So they had to buy their water. Very poor people, and they had to buy their water. But it wasn't even fit enough to wash their hands with. So when our campaign was keep washing your hands, keep sanitizing, keep washing your hands, when these villagers would wash their hands, the women and men showed me that their skin would erupt into these rashes. Almost like immediately they would wash, and uske aadhe ghante baad there would be an eruption because it was contaminated. So I used that to segue into my argument that we all suffered enormously in different ways. We all lost people we love, or we know someone who lost someone, or our friends were impacted, our families were impacted. But we didn't, at least the people sitting in this room, we didn't struggle to survive economically. Now when you couple economic survival with all the other things we were going through, emotional alienation, displacement, your work seeming uncertain, your business seeming uncertain, then it's a whole different tragedy. And that is why it was not the great equalizer.
Barkha, I'm going to firstly extend my heartfelt condolences to your father. You lost him during the second wave. You were reporting then. It must have been a really devastating news to hear. So how was it, from reporting it to living it? Tell us about what that crossover, when that crossover happened, and how did you process that grief?
Yeah, I think for me, the most difficult thing of the last 2 years is that when you're reporting a story and then you become the story you're reporting. It's a very, very strange feeling. And, my life had got obsessed with, I had become fully consumed by this pandemic. As I said, the first year I was driving across the country. The second year, when the second wave hit, I was again traveling all across the country. And I was somewhere between Maharashtra and Gujarat, actually sitting outside a cremation ground. My sister called to tell me that my father had COVID. And initially, these were the days when RT-PCR चाहिए होता था आपको फ्लाइट वापस लेने के लिए भी, और 3-3 दिन लगते थे वो रिजल्ट आने के लिए. And then initially the thought was, let's not send him to hospital, let's try and treat him at home remotely. And long story cut short, when his condition worsened, we had to make a split-second decision and say, okay, hospitalize. Of course, I by then had done so many stories of people dying outside the closed doors of hospitals, hospital beds not being available, oxygen not being available. And here, with my relative privilege, I was begging, but I was able to ring up a doctor and say, please beg. And initially my father was supposed to go into a general room with an attendant. They allowed that because they said maybe he's not that bad. But the hospital that day did not have an ambulance free. And somebody in my family said, "Acha, wo ek private ambulance service hai, aap usko use kar lijiye." And I used that private ambulance service, but मुझे वो ambulance आई थी, वो ambulance तो थी नहीं. It was a broken down Maruti van. उसमें ना कोई paramedics थे, उसमें driver को छोड़ के there was nobody else. It was an old Maruti van, so it had those pattas, those hard benches at the back, and it had one long oxygen cylinder and no mask. And I still believe, I'm haunted by guilt about this. I believe that was a critical error that we made. My sister and I thought, okay, should we take him? Should we wait for an ambulance? And in the panic, we said, okay, we'll manage. Maybe he's not that bad, we'll manage. And this guy told us, mera chalta hai. So we gave our own mask, we hooked it to the oxygen cylinder, and we put my father at the back with his attendant. I got out of the front seat and we drove. The hospital was 1 hour away. And in those days, there was some local lockdown and the police had put jagah barricades and ambulances were crawling instead of having a lead passage. And my heart was sinking, but even then I was, when my father was going to ambulance, I was still filming these traffic jam that the ambulances didn't have a passage and tweeting Arvind Kejriwal saying if he was our chief minister, he do something, there's no lead passage, there's so many ambulances stuck. Anyway, we reached the emergency, and when the emergency doctors looked at him, they basically found that the cylinder had not gone.
Oh.
So his oxygen had just, and they said now he has to go into ICU. Now there was no ICU bed because मैंने तो बड़ी मुश्किल से वो कमरे वाला बेड मांगा था. And literally that story that I had done on everybody else, my father became that story. I became that story with him. He and I sat in that emergency foyer. I hugged him tight. He seemed to have aged 10 years in that ambulance night. And that was the last time I saw him. And 5 days later when he died, we had to cremate him at the cremation ground right next to the hospital, because otherwise it would have been crossing the border back into Delhi. This was in Haryana, technically the hospital. And there was no room in the cremation ground. So once again, the story I have been covering, I came here to call the police to help because there was no place. And that evening, that day was so strange because the ambulance that took him to the cremation ground was state of the art. And I was thinking, oh my God, this ambulance, when I'm carrying my father's body, where was this ambulance when I really needed it? And that evening I came home, and after 1.5 years of reporting COVID, I got COVID the day I cremated my father. It was the most bizarre set of ironies. And then 10 days I worked because I didn't know how. I couldn't deal with what had happened with my dad. So and I was sick. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And then I said, you know what, I have spoken to people in their moment of grief. Now I have to be willing to speak to other people in my moment of grief. Because otherwise, what I ask people to do, if I can't do it myself, so kisi tarah, channels from across the world called me, I said what happened, I hoped it would flag the gaps in the system, and then I worked, and I just worked. I worked through COVID. The day I tested negative, I went to my father's house. His ashes were in an urn. I brought them to my house. I mixed them in the mitti behind in the sort of kiari. I planted a rose bush, and I went down to report again because the only way I knew how to deal with what had happened was that. And it scarred. I lived with my father till I was 40 years old. My sister moved out much earlier. I moved out much later to my own home. And in our family home, I have not been able to आज तक 1 साल 3 महीने हो गए मुझे कोविड दोबारा भी हो गया मतलब ये सब भी हो गया But I have not been able to go up to the steps where I used to. His room and my room was separated by a bathroom. I used to live just 8 bathroom choking. I have not been able to climb the stairs of my family because I just feel like I'll break down if I go up. So we all have our very strange coping mechanisms, and mine is work. I only know how to. You were asking earlier how to cope. Actually, work is my coping mechanism.
And you also said you felt guilty, but you shouldn't. I'm sure his primary emotion was he's really proud of you.
I tell myself that, but you know, daughters, we are plagued by all kinds of guilt.
So we're going to move to a little lighter segment
Yes,
here.
sure.
I'm going to ask you a few questions and you'll have to answer them on the top of your head.
Okay.
But this helps us know our author of Frozen Personal. So Barkha, you were not a journalist. What would you be?
A lawyer.
Ah. I have a lawyer husband now. What are you scared of?
Lifts, elevators, and closed spaces.
A celebrity that gave you the most interesting interview.
I can tell you a celebrity gave me the toughest interview. Can I tell you that?
Yeah,
Amitabh Bachchan. I told Mr. Bachchan that you are such a good actor that I can't get anything real out of you in any interview. मतलब उनका एक मास्क है. वो मास्क कभी नहीं. You cannot. He's so controlled. He's very proper. He's very polite. I've interviewed him dozens of times. You can never penetrate that extent.
And one person who gave you a good interview, one celebrity.
So many. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey, I interviewed in Jaipur, and it was very interesting to be interviewing an interviewer. And, you know, it was just interesting, and you know, we'd all grown up on her as a cultural phenomenon. So to be on the other side, that was very fascinating.
So Barkha, one mistake you made during the pandemic, and one mistake you made during the Kargil war.
I don't think I made any mistake during the Kargil. That I am aware of. If I made mistakes that I'm not aware of, in fact, I'll tell you a story. When I came back from Kargil, somebody started this internet rumor that Barkha, you gave away some positions, and that has caused grave damage to Pakistan. Has got to know their positions, and आपकी वजह से हमारे soldiers को नुकसान. And I was very young, and that time I used to take these things very seriously. Today तो I know कि कुछ भी बकवास बोल दो internet पे, I don't respond. But I was a very young girl, and I was very upset. And I genuinely thought I had made a mistake. So I thought कि I am going to ask somebody कि मैंने कुछ किया जो मुझे नहीं. And you must also remember that while I became the best known face out of Kargil, there was 100 other journalists there, right? So if I had made a mistake, presumably so had everybody else made a mistake. But anyway, Army Chief General Malik called me for a cup of chai. And he called me and he congratulated me and said, thank you for everything you've done. And you've been a big force multiplier for the forces. And he saw me looking थोड़ा सा कि मेरे माइंड में कुछ है. He said, क्या? I said, sir, मैंने ये रूमर ऐसा सुना है. और वो रूमर की कहानी बदलती रहती है. वो रूमर में कभी मेरा फोन तो मेरे पास था नहीं. मेरे पास कोई पुराने ज़माने का कोई सैट फोन था. Army was also using sat phones. There were no phones. I said, then in some rumor it's the light of the camera. That light is bulb से भी कम. I said, in some rumor it's something else कि मैंने अपनी report में कुछ बोल. Like I don't know. The rumor has changed, and I'm really concerned because if I did something unknowingly, I should know so I don't do it again. And he said there's nothing of the kind. He wrote it in his book, in his memoir. Oh, maybe मुझे लोग trolls मिला. So I don't think I made any mistake that I'm aware of. I have to be aware of a mistake to call it a mistake, right? So that's on Kargil. Did I make a mistake in the pandemic? You know, I mean, if I say no to both of these things, it's going to sound like I think I'm perfect. I'll tell you the one mistake. I don't know if it's a mistake, but when you are interviewing people who are grieving, sometimes your tone, even if you want to be very sensitive, but you don't get that perfect, sensitivity, and कभी बाद में you hear yourself and think, no, I could have been softer. I shouldn't have asked this question. या मुझे ये क्वेश्चन थोड़े अलग तरीके से पूछना चाहिए था. So I have that doubt about the pandemic because we were dealing with something very enormous and people were suffering acutely, and I have this slight doubt sometimes that was my tone pitch perfect, and I'm sure it wasn't. So I can count that as potentially a mistake I made during the pandemic.
Well said. Your Twitter bio said, Barkha Rani jam ke barasti hai. What does it mean?
It means that I'm a full-blooded Punjabi. I feel everything very और मुझे गुस्सा आता है तो बहुत गुस्सा आता है, हंसी आती है तो बहुत हंसी आती है, tears आते हैं तो बहुत आंसू आते हैं. It means that I live fully. It just means that I live every moment fully. And I think that if anything that we should have learned from these last 2 years, it is that please live every moment fully. Because who knows what tomorrow is bringing. And it also means that I'm not scared of other people's opinion of me. I live on my own terms.
Wonderful. Your book is giving out a very, very moving message. Very moving message indeed. Now, what do you plan to harvest out of it?
Well, I'm concentrating on my digital platform. It's called Mojo Story. Mojo means magic. I felt that television had become very stale. I felt I had got bored. I had to make a decision. It was now or never for me. Either I could have continued doing more of the same, or I felt that digital is now the medium of the future. Future क्या present? मैं कहीं भी जाती हूँ, if I ask people how do you consume your content, most people consume their content on their phones or their laptops. Literally, other than very old people, nobody is turning on at some designated hour watching anything. So I wanted to wrap this technological change, ride the technological curve, build my company bigger and bigger. We're going to hit 1 million subscribers soon on YouTube. If you haven't, please go to Mojo Story and subscribe and follow it. Please do that because we're at 830,000 subscribers and we have to hit 1 million in the next two months is my target. So help me do that.
Yes, Jalandhar.
And we have a text website now, mojostory.com, so you can look that up. We have a special women's property called Be the Women. And my next target is going to be to work with teenage girls between 13 and 18 because I think that's when it starts to give girls confidence. My mother, other role models in my life gave me that confidence when I was a teenager. So I really want to start giving back in that age group because I think that's where that shaping and molding.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. So I'm very, very confident that you're going to be documenting many, many more stories.
I hope so.
You're not done.
I'm not done at all. I'm just getting started.
And congratulations on all the hard work that you've put in to build this up. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me, Barkha. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being in Jalandhar. And are you open to questions?
Yes, how bit of time are you doing?
We're 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yes, alright. Lovely Autistic Center here in Jalandhar. So please.
Well, I'm so glad I mentioned that.
Yes.
Absolutely. In fact, I've been following you very avidly through COVID, and my question is related to something you answered in bits, but I'd really like to know something that, working for a cause, and you work for causes, so many of them, you pick them up. There are times that you may have felt, I do want to give up. So, murder mysteries aside and work aside, what keeps you going? Because for us, especially during the pandemic, some of our children went missing.
Yeah.
We had great success stories in our little city here as well. But we do face that moment, and I want that to take away with me, today.
Yeah.
Well, how do you pick yourself up?
And I'm not going to lie to you and say that I never feel this, because we all feel it at times, and we are living in an extraordinarily difficult time. It is a difficult time in so many ways, right? It is a difficult time with COVID, it is a difficult time with the economy. You are dealing with special needs kids, so you have an added layer of challenges at all times. And of course there are moments, and I'll tell you, something comes along when you realize that you have made a difference to the life of someone else. For me, I remember I was at Oxford University just last month and I was speaking on my book. And in the audience there was a young girl who's not so young, I think she was almost going to be a professor. And she handed me this postcard and she said, read it later. And I read it later, it was a handwritten postcard. And it said, you changed my life. you changed my life because I used to feel so much pressure at home, and then I used to keep seeing what you're doing, and you changed my life, and you gave me the courage to do this. And suddenly, like that heaviness that I was feeling, it lifted. And I'll give you a story closer home to you. I was in a children's ICU in a hospital in Bombay, and the entire ward was mothers and special needs kids. Entire COVID ward. And because there were special needs, the parents were allowed to stay with the kids. And we did a story on how these kids and their parents were battling. And you know, the response we got to that, because nobody, they have been invisibilized. किसी ने सोचा तक नहीं था कि आप सोचिए तो सही what is happening to children with special needs and what is happening to their families. And I'll tell you that response, you know, it just makes you feel on shitty days that as long as somebody's life is moved by what you do, and in all our spaces this applies, not just in my life, that is what I tell myself. You make a difference. You have to keep feeling you make a difference. It's very tough to keep going if you feel you don't make a difference, but we all make a difference to somebody else's life. And I think that the trick is to open yourself up to that knowledge and take that compliment. If somebody tells you, you know, you really changed my life, don't say, "Arey, nahi, nahi." Say, "I'm really happy to hear that I changed your life, because that gives me the strength to live tomorrow."
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing for us. And just another little request that when you do start working with those young ladies, please make sure it's an inclusive platform that you're working for, and lots of special needs are out there.
Absolutely. That's what you're telling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you know, before I say anything, I just like to say that I've really been appreciating the way, you know, you've kind of taken journalism, especially women journalism, to another level.
Thank you.
And the thing is that you know what happens is that sometimes you need a leader. You just need somebody to lead you on, and I'm sure you must have really set a fantastic example for people who are following you now. But I want to know that which sphere of your journalism you were really passionate about, that really was soul stirring, whether it was political or military.
I think military, that's easy to answer, military. I'm also interested in politics, it bores me.
Yeah.
You know, I cover it. I'll tell you something very interesting. I was so angry that elections were being held in during the second COVID. मुझे इतना गुस्सा था कि आपके स्कूल्स बंद हैं और आपके पोलिंग बूथ्स खुले हैं, that I boycott after one music election. I decided I will not cover the elections. I will cover the elections on principle, because I felt the elections should be held. So I have very little interest. I have very little emotional interest. I cover politics because it's my job. I have no emotional interest here. I am emotional about the military, and I am emotional about ordinary Indians. I feel very strongly about human stories.
Okay, and which sphere would you say that you really made a difference? Like maybe like if you were...
How can I judge that? You tell me that. I'm not
like, you know, you were a spokesperson in politics.
I think women, yeah. I think I have made a difference to the lives of young women. I would say that.
I would like to say something. Yes. I think a lot of people say to young girls, be brave, be strong, be a Barkha.
Thank you. That makes my day.
So I congratulate you on this amazing book that I'm really looking forward to read now.
Thank you.
So, you know, for the longest time, I've admired you as a girl. I wanted to be a journalist, and I remember my father, you know, he tore up my admission form and said, journalism is not for girls. Show me one journalist, you know, a woman journalist. And I named you. And you know what he said? She's the only one. Yeah, so that's what happened to me. So, you know, listening to you today, you reminded me of Princess Diana, how she would walk into worlds filled with people, children with AIDS, interact with them, touch them, especially at a time when AIDS was a huge taboo. Even till today, you know, patients are ostracized, you know it. What I want to ask you is that Barkha would you know, walking voluntarily into places that would endanger you.
Of course, Barkha could have done that.
Yeah, and what do you do?
What I do is almost my mind. I'm more trained now than I was when I first went to Kargil. But the mechanism is the same. You feel you're part of something that is larger than you as an individual. Why does a soldier, why does Brigadier Bajwa risk his life to fight for India? Because India is larger than he thinks Brigadier Bajwa. The Paltan is larger than the soldier, the country is larger than the unit, and so on. Similarly, I feel whatever I do, where I take a risk, it is larger than me. So it helps me stay focused, one. And two, in these very difficult situations, survival is such a challenge. You have to first keep alive. So all your energy is taken actually by really mundane things. When I was traveling for COVID, I would keep thinking, ये footage कैसे जाएगी? आज मैं सोऊंगी कहाँ? मैं अपने कैमरामैन को खाना कहाँ से दिलाऊंगी? You have to think of these things. And then the fear corrodes you later. You get nightmares, रात को नींद नहीं आती, you cry more, कभी गुस्सा जल्दी आ जाता है, you feel your mortality. So I would be lying to you if I told you that the exposure to fear has not changed me. But it has, what we learn, people like us who do this, you learn to manage your fear. That is what it is. It's not that the fear is not there, you manage your fear. And if you have a dream, even if your form was torn up, then it's never too late to pursue your dream.
Thank you, Barkha. Your courage is legendary. Like, I remember you just admitted to giving interviews after your father's demise, but I remember seeing you on Instagram. I believe you went live.
Yes.
I saw it.
And you were crying, and I was weeping when I saw it. So, kudos.
Enjoyed this session. Thank you for sharing your experiences as a frontline journalist, listening to your conversation about your life, your real, fearless reporting, and your latest book kept us all deeply riveted. The way you documented the human story of the pandemic on road and recorded it in your book, Humans of COVID, deserves a big round of applause. On behalf of the Barkha Foundation, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to you. I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to our patron Sri Cement Limited, the new and hospitality partner Radisson Jalandhar, and the amazing literary enthusiasts of Jalandhar. I request Ms. Gurjot Kaur from the Dirijit Group to facilitate Barkha Dutt with a Kanha.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.